Ex-prisoners of Reddit who have served long sentences, what were the last few days like leading up to your release? I did 15 years 9 mths. Got paroled, and I didn't want anyone to know. Too many prisoners get flopped by the parole board. I did a 6-month flop, and they get angry at the guys who get paroled. Guys will fight you just to try and get your parole taken, or some will see it at a chance to steal. Hey, he's going home, he don't need that garbage, and he sure ain't gonna fight for it. I gave most of my stuff to lifers, long-timers who didn't have family to send them money. So, the last few days were really spent trying to take up the boredom of no way to pass the time. Didn't really work about work, already had a place to live. I'm one of the fortunate ones, just worked at keeping my head down and getting out of the gate. I did 2 years, 6 months, 19 days for a violent crime I committed as a dumbass 21 years old. In the months leading up, I was basically walking on eggshells trying my best to make sure I didn't get into any fights, or any sort of trouble for that matter, that would get me put into solitary and could extend my time. The night of I was just giving all my belongings away to friends, extra sneakers and clothes, soap and shampoo, polos for visits, cassette tapes, cooking utensils, food, books, etc. Everyone was grateful, but definitely an odd experience to go through. Some of the younger dudes fluffed with me a little and roughed me up, more like in a friendly wrestling way and not actually fighting, but there was some added aggression in there as I could tell they were pretty jealous. I also made my last phone call from the in-house phone booth to make sure my ride was going to be ready the next day. That morning I woke up and was just like, wait, this is really happening? Gave away any last-minute garbage and said my goodbyes, traded a few addresses, and then was led down to the transport building for final preparations. After changing into street clothes, I sat there from 7:30 to 10:45, all the while with the guards telling me nobody was there to pick me up. I darn well knew my mom was there, and I had to wait until they showed up. Finally they said my ride came, put me in the van and took me to the main admin building where I literally just walked up and through the front doors. I remember looking around like, really, I'm just allowed to walk right out? IDK, how to explain it, just a crazy thought to process after being locked up for those 2.5 years and being ordered to do everything and then suddenly, just go ahead, walk right out. Got out, walked right up to my mom's car. She had been there waiting since 7 a.m. Fluff you cuz for that last bullgarbage ploy, gave her one of the more emotional hugs of my life and then got in the car and she drove me the fluff out of there. This October will be 8 years since my release. Not a day goes by that I don't think about it in some way. Unit 26 at Parkman Penitentiary in Ms. is for 2 types of inmates, nonviolent drug and alcohol first offenders and long-term inmates on their way out the door. The theory is that those long-term guys need to brush up on their social skills so they get put in with short-time non-threatening drunks and drug users. I did a year in rehab and met a guy who did 25 years in prison for murder. I asked him a lot about what it was like inside and getting out and what it was like now that he was out. He said he felt scared when he was getting out and kind of sad, because of all the people he was leaving. He'd been in that specific prison for over 8 years and knew almost everyone and had some close friendships that he missed. He felt lonely after he left and was actually glad that his halfway house was a live-in, year-long rehab. It felt familiar to him. He did have a lot of trouble getting work though. I asked my friend this since we are sitting at a diner. He said, you get excited and depressed at the same time, excited for the freedom, depressed because you will have a hard time getting a job. He had been sentenced for 18 serving just shy of 13. He's doing well for himself and works on hot water heaters for a living. Paraphrased from an old friend of mine, excited but also scared and anxious, partly because he was convinced that somehow they'd reverse his parole, partly because he was terrified he wouldn't be able to readjust. Was also afraid his relationships with his kids wouldn't be able to recover. Overall, until he actually got out, he was more stressed than excited, but the last few hours, when he realized he was actually getting out, he said those were the longest hours of his life, simultaneously happy but also thinking, okay, they decided I get to go, why the hell can't I leave already? Said it was like taking a plane to go on your dream vacation, but the flight takes forever, there's no movie and you forgot to bring a book. Nervous of the unknown, didn't know where I was going to live, what town I was going to parole to after I did treatment, being able to find a job, just the fear of the unknown for me. My buddy's dad came out of a 22-year bid, said he misses it in some ways, been a year and don't think he's worked more than 2 days in a row. My buddy has to stay with us because of the unpredictability on top of that his nephew or something got sentenced to 9 years, and the circle of broken households continue. Using a throwaway account, even though this will probably be buried. The last few days are laden with anxiety and fear. Anxiety because you want to be out. You want to be free. You want to be able to walk more than 6 steps in a direction before hitting a wall. Fear because other people know you're getting out and some of them are just there to fluff it up for you. Another person mentioned that people will try to fight you or steal from you, because you're not going to retaliate. You can't. You can't jeopardize your freedom. Not when you're this close. And #X200B, I served time for a very ugly crime. The kind you don't come back from. I was afraid for a myriad of reasons. Not the least of which was how will I ever be able to reintegrate into society. On top of that, you have to wonder if any of your friends will even associate with you again. Mine don't. I also haven't been able to get a job. I've been out for 18 months, except for the one time I got a job at a gas station for 2 days before they completed their background check and decided that they wouldn't let me continue. I'm not going to reoffend because I refuse to go back, but I genuinely can't see a way forward. At least while I was locked up I knew what I was going to do tomorrow, I knew how I was going to get money, I knew what was in store for me. Out here I'm a leech. I hate it, and #X200B, so what were my last few days like? They were filled with a simultaneous excitement at having freedom, and a deep, deep fear of being free and not having rigid structure. You should read The Prison Diaries by Jeffrey Archer. It's a real eye-opener. Some of the long-termers get released gradually back into society, but they struggle to deal with basic things such as using a supermarket they've had so long where every decision is made for them. Making their own decisions suddenly becomes too much to deal with. Your instincts are to lock bad people up and throw away the key, but for many prisoners this is counterproductive and they spend the rest of their lives costing the taxpayer instead of contributing to society. The prison system is broken. I work in the field and have worked with long-term offenders during their release. The main comments I keep hearing are, they hate being in crowds, they can't believe how advanced cell phones are. I tried explaining Pokémon Go to a guy who was about to go out, and he just straight up didn't believe me. He got angry cause he thought I was messing with him. It's hard to sleep in. They often wait at home for count even though there is no count. Sadly, many offenders will actually re-offend to come back in. They feel at home in jail, and the world is a big, scary place. We call those people institutionalized, and they often self-sabotage before, or shortly after their release. If someone makes it out past 1 year with no problems, they have a much likelier chance of being successful. The 48-hour post-release is often the most crucial. Suicide risks are high during this period when the shock is heaviest. I've even given my personal cell hash to some released offenders and told them to call me if they need to, when I was worried about them. Feel free to release processes is something I know a lot about. People often don't like halfway houses near their places, but they are invaluable for helping with releases. I did 5 years. By that time I made it to a minimum security prison. That means a jail with no walls and no locks. You could easily escape if you wanted, but you would just be an idiot too. The days dragged on slow. I couldn't sleep for the last few weeks. I was anxious and nervous. I had plans to have all types of happy fun time and eat all types of food, but none of my plans panned out the way I imagined they would. I was stoked as fluff. You know that sense of euphoria you got on Christmas morning as a kid? It's like that, but it lasts a good year after you get out too. Then life sets in and you realize it's fluffing hard to do anything as a convict. Most people just go back to prison. I managed to land a good job in the oil field and stay free. I had all my tattoos removed, made sure nobody I used to know knew my number or where I was, then basically just hit the restart button. Most of the people you meet in prison are pieces of garbage. Gotta disassociate with them and it makes things much easier. TLDR, felt like Christmas as a kid, and the feeling lasted for a good while. Long days and longer nights. A high level of boredom coupled with an underlying excitement and fear about the future. Self-imposed limits on activities and interactions out of concern that something might happen that would affect your release. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. Source, served 9 years between 73 and 82. I did 11 months, was a year but got out a little early. A lot of guys told me there was a lot of anxiety and the weirdest thing was being able to wake up, leave their house and go to bed at whatever time, being so dependent on the government for so long and then just being released all of a sudden to take care of your own was a lot even for a lot of adults. Most of them being introduced to probation, parole, so there are added hoops to your life as far as getting a job and doing everyday things. When I was released I had a lot of things lined up for me like going back to school and had a good place to live, so when I got out I was ready to be out. The days leading up were very long days, just watching the clock, knowing you're finally going to be out in the real world. I was really nervous knowing I could have not gotten out on that day, but lucky for me I was and have got back into school since.